hopefully keeps the critters from crawling through.
He asked you what vintage.
Oh, I thought he said advantage.
Vintage year.
I don't know. It's at least 35 years old. I don't even remember where I got it now.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that one came from my folks, so it could be 50, 60 years old.
Mm-hmm. Looks like nice wood.
It is, and it's reasonably decently taken care of.
Okay.
So when you lift it up, it tucks. Hi, Stell.
Hi, good afternoon, you guys. How are you today?
Good.
All right. Do we have everybody?
Everyone is here.
Is Marcel here?
Everybody's here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Is Marcel? Okay,
Yeah.
great. I'm trying to see. Yeah, okay, great. Perfect. All right. Well, welcome everybody to I'm sorry, I have to wear my glasses here. To the June 18th meeting of the Humboldt County Board of Humboldt County Association of Governments. And in accordance with Executive Order N29-20, the Humboldt County Association of Governments meeting is being held virtually and will continue to be held virtually until further notice. And as people who have seen the agenda know, the meeting can be viewed through Access Humboldt website at www.accesshumboldt.net, Sunderlink channels 10, 11, and 12, or Access Humboldt's YouTube channel at www.youtube.com, user Access Humboldt. Also, with regard to public comment, when the HCOG board announces the agenda item that you wish to comment on, please call the conference line and turn off your TV or live stream. Please call 669-900-6833. Enter the meeting ID, which is 856-5786-5434. And then when you press *9 on your phone, this will raise your hand and you will continue to hear the meeting while you're waiting to speak. You can also send a comment by email, obviously before, but also during. If you want to send a comment by email during, it is Debbie, DEBBIE .egger, EGGER @hcog.net. So again, this is the regular meeting of the Humboldt County Association of Governments. I'm sitting here in the Board of Supervisors chamber, so I'm kind of preconditioned to say that instead. I'm calling the meeting to order right now and invite Christy or whoever is there from staff to do the roll call.
Thank you. It's Christy, and I will call roll. Mayor Winkler,
Here.
Mayor Jones,
Here.
Mayor Seaman,
Here.
Councilmember Smith, Councilmember Johnson,
Here.
Councilmember Strand,
Here.
Councilmember West,
Here.
Okay.
thank you,
Oh, good.
Supervisor Fennell,
Here.
Councilmember Patino,
Here.
Mr. Tucker.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. We are now adjourning as the HCOG board and convening as the Policy Advisory Committee. The Policy Advisory Committee convenes to include representation from Caltrans and the Humboldt Transit Authority for items that are specific to transportation. So the next item on the agenda is public participation. This agenda item is reserved for matters that are not on the agenda that may be presented by the public over which the PAC has jurisdiction, Policy Action Committee. Is there any member of the public who would like to speak on items not on the agenda? Who? Christy, is that you?
There is no public comment.
Thank you very much. All right. Seeing no public comment, we'll move on to item number 4, which is approval of the meeting record for May 21st, which is included in your packet.
Supervisor Fennel, I have a correction to make on the minutes.
Thank you.
On
Jones.
the last page, it stated that Mayor Jones reported that there will be a virtual groundbreaking ceremony for the Annie Mary Rail Trail on May 30th. That was not virtual. It was an actual meeting. There were about 30 of us next to the museum in Blue Lake, and we had our golden shovels. There was a picture in the Times Standard about it. It was later put on a channel on a show, but it was an actual groundbreaking. We all wore our masks and it was raining, but we were all there. So that needs to be corrected, not virtual. It should just say there will be a groundbreaking ceremony. Just scratch virtual.
Thank you, Mayor Jones. And actually, I do know that that happened too, because it made it into the media. So very nice. Any further corrections on the minutes? Okay, I'll entertain a motion to approve those.
I so move to approve the meeting of whatever it was, May 21st, 2020.
I'll second that.
With obviously with the corrections.
With
Yes.
that correction.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, great, thanks. Thank you. So on an item such as this, during virtual meetings, we actually do a roll call on every item that requires a vote. So I'll ask Christy to do the roll call, please.
Mayor Winkler,
Aye.
Mayor Jones,
Yes.
Mayor Seaman,
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson,
Yes.
Councilmember Strand,
Yes.
Councilmember West,
Yes.
Supervisor Fennel,
Yes,
Councilmember Patino,
Yes.
Mr. Tucker.
Yes.
Thank you, unanimous vote.
thank you very much.
Can I
Yes.
ask whether Paul Patino is here as the council person from Arcata, or is he here as a representative of the bus?
HTA.
Yeah,
I'm here for HTA.
that's what I thought. Thank you.
Okay, that will bring us to item number 5. We have 3 presentations here today, beginning with one from the Caltrans project manager, Jeff Pimentel, and he'll provide an update on the Eureka Arcata 101 corridor project.
Good afternoon. Can you guys hear me okay?
We can hear you well, Jeff.
All right, great. Thanks for having me today. So I wanted to give an update on a few things on corridor related items. First of all, is if anyone's traveled between Eureka and Arcata recently, you'll notice some construction activity going on out there. So that is our acceleration deceleration lane project, our Jacoby Creek and Gannon Slough project, and the high tension cable barrier project. So those are proceeding full steam ahead. There are some single lane closures that people will be experiencing, and we are monitoring the traffic. We're actually at a time right now where our traffic volumes are extremely low. So it was a night work job, but we've been doing some day work in order to try to get them completed sooner for the public as well. So we are monitoring that. And moving on from there, our Tide Gates project, our bids came in and we recommended award off the top of my head here, I don't have the contractor that got that one, and I'm not even sure I'm able to release that yet. But we do have a contractor that was awarded to, so that one should be getting an approved contract with our contractor here soon and moving forward. And the bids came in related to the on the Eureka Arcata wetland mitigation project for the Samoa parcel. The bids came in, and they came in actually right around 50% of the engineer's estimate. So the bids came in at just over 5.1 million. The engineer's estimate was a little over, just over 9 million. And so with that, I met with our headquarters STIP programming contacts to see if HCOG would be seeing savings from that since the bids came in so low. And I'm told that yes, we can prepare a book item to the CTC to secure the savings. And so basically, based on the proportions that the SHOP projects and the STIP project that had the RIP shares on it were funding, my calculations show that HCOG should be seeing about $3,015,000 in savings going back to your RIP shares. And I'm told by our headquarters programming folks that savings, once we send that to the CTC and it secures approval, that money is immediately available in the current STIP cycle to HCOG. So that's good news. And that'll couple with the savings we previously had also on some of the support resources on the mitigation side as well, that I think you guys were briefed on here in the last few months. So we're likely I did discuss this with Marcella, that we were going to be seeking to see if there in fact would be savings. I hadn't had a chance to brief her on that yet, but there are going to be savings coming back. We'll have to prepare that book item, but we'd like to wait until the award and approval of the contractor's contract is complete. The only caveat would be if the low bidder, say, didn't have a responsive bid, and there were issues with the bid, which our headquarters contracting branch is currently analyzing, then we'd have to go to the second bidder. The second bidder is still right around, it's marginally above the low bidder. So I believe even going to the fourth ranked bidder, we received extremely low bids. So regardless, we expect a substantial savings going back to RIP shares as a result of the low bids. And we are seeing this kind of right now. I think it's related to contractors wanting to keep their workers busy and working and lining up work. So we are seeing across other projects in the state and region lower bids. Any questions on that so far before I move on to the actual Indianola undercrossing update?
I actually have one question, Jeff.
Yeah, go for it.
The next CTC meeting is in August, I think the 18th. Do you foresee it coming back then? Because my understanding is that once it's allocated, you don't get the funding back, at least for local governments. So maybe it's different for Caltrans. I'm not sure, but I can't wait to see.
Yeah, I spoke with Rambabu, he's the head of the STIP for the state, and he told me that there would be a savings. We would have to go seek that savings through a book item to the CTC requesting it. And we already allocated the funds back in March. So we already went through allocation. That was, what Matt Brady and myself and Richard Mullen were all wondering. And so I did meet with Rambabu, and he confirmed that we can prepare a book item and secure those savings. And likewise, the money that the ITIP put in for its share would go, back to ITIP as well. So, but 3 million is what I calculated based on, I think when you look at that funding on that phase, it was, I think, I don't have the percentage split in front of me right now, but I believe it was like a 35-65 split, 35% RIP, 65% ITIP on that portion of the work and the way that was split up. So, which is much better than obviously the 85-15. So that's my calculate. More will come on that. but we're not targeting the August meeting because the deadline to get on the August meeting agenda is Monday, and we won't have, you know, the award and contract approval process done by then. So if we prepared the book item for this amount of money, and then say the first ranked bidder, we weren't able to award them because there was some issue with their bid, we'd have to go to the next ranking bidder, and their bid's a little high. So that means, you know, the book item would be null and void. It wouldn't be valid anymore. So we're just going to wait for the October meeting and target that one. I believe by the deadline for the October meeting, we should have secured all those items such as award and contract approval. Does that answer your question,
really good.
Marcella?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
That's a relief. Looking forward to you going to bat for us and making sure that comes back, and appreciate that. Any other questions for Jeff before he goes on to the next part of his presentation? Okay, you can go ahead, Jeff, please.
Okay, great, thanks. So last update I had was on our design progress on the Indianola undercrossing. So, you know, we had the substantial cost increase last year, and we went through a process to try to reduce those costs by any means necessary while still delivering the identical scope and project without compromising safety or quality of the project. And we were able to bring some of those costs down to some degree. But then the next exercise has been with the extreme soil consolidation that we're expecting out there, our number of construction seasons in construction, with the amount of time we'd have to wait for that soil to consolidate before we could place the fill for the approach fills to the structure in stages, the length of the job was going to be 6 construction seasons. And that just wasn't something that we were happy with for the traveling public. And so we hired Kleinfelder, a geotechnical consultant, and worked with our own geotechnical branch to try to find alternative solutions that we could construct much quicker, but within the program budget of this that we just secured at the March CTC meeting with the 2020 STIP. And so that work concluded here recently. There were a number of alternatives that were identified. A lot of them were very costly, well outside our program budget, or wouldn't be consistent with our environmental documents or permit because of different elements of construction methods that were just going to violate some of those terms. But there was one alternative that fell out of that, and it's called a construction method called column supported embankment. And so essentially what we're proposing to do is utilize columns at certain intervals along the approach fills that will be embedded in this soft soil layer, which is rather deep, and bear down to our firmer soils. And then on top of those columns, essentially more or less at the surface of our soft soil layer, is what's called a load transfer platform with geosynthetic fabric and other materials that are placed in that layer that essentially are embankment that sits above. The load is then transferred to this load transfer platform and into these columns and these piles that sit in the ground that bear down to the firmer soil. And by doing this and using this method, we will avoid the need to have to wait for the soil to consolidate. And our staff and Kleinfelder are estimating that the construction seasons would go down from 6 to as little as 3. So we're really excited about that news. And I did brief Marcella about this last week. Last week, I took this to Caltrans executive staff team, which includes Matt Brady and Richard Mullen and all the other deputies across all of our functions. And they concurred with our team's recommendation to move forward with this construction method. So we are going to proceed with that. There is a risk, obviously, that the bids could come in higher than our programmed amount. This is a geotechnical technology and construction method that Caltrans is actually, based on our team's research, has never used. So we have hired another industry subject matter expert from a company called the Collins Group, who has an immense amount of experience with this specific construction method, and they will be helping us draft the specifications for this project, because the way that this project is executed and put out is we don't actually give the contractor a set of plans and specifics on how to build it. We give them parameters and design specifications they need to meet, and then they submit their design using this technology and method, and then we would approve it. So it's a little bit different in how this is typically done from our normal putting out a set of plans process that we normally do on our contracts. To mitigate that risk, if the bids do come in high, our headquarters programming folks tell us that we can apply for an award extension. So normally we have 6 months to award a project once we allocate the funds, but we can seek an extension. So we'll be seeking a 12-month extension to award to mitigate that risk. So if the bids were to come in so high that it wasn't able to be awarded, the plan would be to repackage the plans and put out what we're calling our base case scenario, or the former design that would take 6 seasons. But with that, we wouldn't lose the funds and we'd be able to proceed still with our project. There would be a delay, obviously, in getting the project out, but we feel it's a worthy risk to take to hopefully cut the construction time frame in half. That's all I have.
Any questions for Jeff on this? Yes, Mayor Jones, and then Mayor Seaman.
I just want clarification. Jeff, did you say it was going down to a 3-month construction time? Are we talking months?
No,
or years?
three seasons. So I should have clarified years. So we were at 6 and we're hoping to go down to 3. We don't expect it to go more than 4, however.
Did you say seasons?
Seasons, as in
Okay.
years. Yeah.
Not years, seasons. Okay.
When I say a season, though, that I mean a year, a construction season.
Okay. I just need clarification on that. So we're talking about 3 years versus 6.
Correct.
Thank you.
Sorry for that confusion.
Mayor Seaman.
That was my question, was how long is the season? So we are talking about years. So if we had a delay, an extension and delay, would that wouldn't be a whole season then, because the season is a whole year? Or if the delay came at a bad time?
Yeah, it depends to some degree. I mean, with this project, with some of our projects, we're working and we're avoiding wetlands and waters. We have certain work windows. We can't, typically from about June to October is our work window. In this case, we'll be filling wetlands. So once we fill those wetlands in that first season, then we really don't have these stringent work windows. So for the most part, we will be working throughout the year. But construction seasons, I guess, is just kind of a term some of us use because there are those prime dry months when you get more work done. But we do expect to be working around the calendar year on the project. It just also kind of depends on when the contract is let out. A lot of our projects say if it's a really wet winter, and especially for this one, and say contract starts in December, but it's really wet, and they start getting out there with big equipment to try to place the fill and whatnot in the middle of the median. It just may be too wet. The water may start pumping, so they may need to wait. So some of those factors may influence on when they can really start, and could also influence whether we can really be down to 3 years or maybe we're closer to 4. Those are still some things we're trying to iron out.
So I don't think I was clear with my question. So if we go down to 3 and we try this method, but we can't get the bids that we need, we can delay.
We can
Just
delay our
muted.
award.
Oh, could you hear me before? Because I thought I was on mute.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So if we delay the award, then will it become like 7 seasons now because we lost time? That was it.
We lost time. We'd still expect to be in construction for 6 years. I'm just going to start saying years. We'd still be in construction for 6 years, but we would have delayed starting it by approximately 6+ months. So then you could say that when we were initially done with the project, we wouldn't have a completed project for 6.5 years, say, but we wouldn't be doing anything for that 6 months. It just lost time.
But the people that want it done, that 6 months matters. But that was all I wanted to know.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, we just feel that the benefits of getting it done in 3 years, and there's also some big risks for construction with the soils consolidating. So our estimates, our geotechnical estimates are, it will take this amount of time, but those soils need to reach 95% compaction before we're able to go and place another stage, layer of fill. And if that's taking longer, I mean, it could even push the construction longer than 6 years potentially. So we also see this column support and embankment method as minimizing some of the geotechnical risks that we have in the project.
Excellent. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions, Jeff? Well, I have one. I have a couple actually. I'm looking more at the money side of it, and given that we're dependent basically on the Collins Group being the experts in this, and pretty much nobody else can do it, are we at risk of some heavy duty add-ons as far as the contract is concerned?
No, we're not expecting that. All the work that has been done to date with Kleinfelder has actually been paid for out of our shop projects. Intentionally, we did that. We felt that the soil issue coming up is just something, it was unfortunate. And Caltrans, myself, at the recommendation to Richard and our management, that I wanted to find a way to pay for it out of the shop projects. And we had some of the shop projects that had a little extra design budget that hadn't been expended when we put those projects out. And so we utilized those budgets to do the work with Kleinfelder. Starting this month, the work Kleinfelder will be doing for us will be going against the STIP project as of this month. And the Collins Group, it's really one individual that'll be helping us on that. It's not going to be, say, a team of consultants that's going to be producing a lot of deliverables. It's essentially them advising our staff on how to put these specifications together. So it's more staff consulting with our staff, being sure that we're crossing our T's and dotting our I's. And this is something very new as of last week. So something I am planning to do is to get estimates from our staff on how much more and costs from these individuals we expect there to be. And then I'll have a better idea. But as of right now, I'm not expecting there to be a support cost increase on the STIP side as a result.
So you mentioned, we talked about this the last time, is the whole compaction plan and all that. What if during the middle of that you have an earthquake? Is all that? I mean, is it potential?
Yeah. So if there were an earthquake event, it really would depend on the magnitude of that earthquake. But if the earthquake event was large enough, it could definitely pose some issues with the construction. I think that would be the case on any project that we're constructing, not just isolated to this one. So no doubt that's a risk, and obviously an unforeseen condition. It's nothing that we necessarily designed for, that I'm aware of. I can check on that, but I'm pretty certain that that's not something that we would design for above and beyond our normal. I mean, there's obviously designs and calculations that go into false work and various other items that are constructed in order to facilitate the construction of the structure, walls, etc. And in those calculations and designs, there's no doubt seismic factors that go into designing those. But I don't believe that there's anything extra that we'd be doing on top of our standard procedures to, say, curb any damage from a extremely large seismic event, anything larger than what the loading standards that our engineers utilize for structural calcs.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. I was kind of teasing that along. I'm not enough of an expert to know. I just had this vision, you're compacting the earth, you're waiting for you compacting it. Well, anyway, don't want to waste your time or anybody else's either. Is there anybody from the public who'd like to comment on this item?
There are no comments from the public.
Councilman
Thank you, Chris.
Strahan had her hand up, and I also have a couple of comments.
Oh yeah, sorry, I don't see that. I'm trying to, my screen's small, so thank you for that.
I just have a question, please. When do you foresee letting the contract for bid? How far out is this?
Right now, our schedule, our target date to have the plans complete and ready for bid is about February of next year. And it takes about a month plus before we are able to get it out for advertisement. So I would expect sometime in the spring of next year, the project would be going out for advertisement to contractors.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to remind everyone about our STIP process last December. Caltrans had a $20.7 million increase, and that was for the extended season, so up to 6 years. So if it does happen that we're going with this alternative method, I do expect Caltrans to come back with a different cost estimate because it's a different project than what is currently funded. And I don't expect any cost increases since we've had so many over the last 4 years.
Thank you, Marcella.
Yeah, and Marcella, I can make a comment on that. The goal with this in moving forward with the column supported embankment was we felt it was a feasible alternative, but the team was verifying that they felt that we could construct it within the program budget. So at this time, our estimates, and obviously with various contract items, there's always a range in costs. When you have, say, the piles for the column support and embankment, we've assumed a cost per lineal foot on those piles. There's a range for those, and we sit in the lower end of that range, mainly due to the high quantity of piles and length of piles that we'll be installing, which is typically would drive the price down. But should some of those items come in much higher, we need to discuss it at that time. But the plan at this time would be, if they did come in higher, then we would have to go back to our plan A of the 6 seasons of construction. I also know that our construction support numbers related to the 6 seasons was aggressively estimated because the cost increase was obviously very sensitive because we had already been through another one not too far before this. And so I'm hoping there would be a savings, but I wouldn't expect it to be linear, such as, we're cutting the construction in half. It is a different construction technology. It'll probably require more inspection staff, and it's highly specialized work. So we'll need to evaluate at that time with construction, but that's definitely something that we'll do, is to have our construction support resources reevaluated and reestimated based on this current construction method and number of working days.
Yeah, all I ask is that this board is the decision maker on that, and they have all the information before them when that decision's made.
Thank you, Marcelo.
Sounds great.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate that. We're all going to keep our fingers crossed that this actually gets going. So we'll go to the next item now. This is 5B, and this comes to us courtesy of Keith Borges. It's the TDA Fiscal and Compliance Audits. Welcome, Mr. Borges.
Thank you. Thank you. Good to be here to make a presentation of the annual fiscal and compliance audits for the year ending June 30, 2019. We did have the bulk of these audits. Normally this is done prior to the March 31st State Controller's Office deadline. And we did have the bulk of the audits, essentially all of them completed by that time, and they were transmitted to the Controller's Office. Pretty much the presentation that got moved back a bit because of the pandemic. One of the audits, Humboldt Transit Authority, did get completed after the March 31st deadline and has been submitted. And one of the audits, City of Arcata, actually remains uncompleted at this time, and we'll touch on that when we get to the management letter a little bit. But as many of you know who have gone through the cycle before, our annual fiscal and compliance audit consists of auditing the 7 cities and the county in their capacity as claimants of TDA funds, as well as audits of the 2 joint powers authorities, HCOG and Humboldt Transit Authority. The Humboldt Transit Authority gets their own obvious separate independent audit. They had a presentation made to their board earlier this month. So I will not touch too much on Humboldt Transit Authority other than maybe just mention a little bit in their capacity as having absorbed the city of Eureka's system in the last audit cycle. Our primary audit then consists of the HCOG as the Regional Transportation Planning Agency, the RTPA. And for that, we prepare a full, complete set of governmental financial statements in accordance with all the rules and requirements and regulations. That includes the operational activities of HCOG, the various projects and programs that it administers. In addition, it also includes the activities for which HCOG acts as the fiduciary. It handles the funds, the local transportation funds, the state transit assistance funds, the regional surface transportation funds, and the state of good repair funds as a fiduciary for the cities and the county. It acts as the conduit through which the funds are received from the state and then passed through to the individual cities and counties. So those are part of HCOG's financial statements, but in a fiduciary capacity role. At the claimant level, it's a much abbreviated audit. We're only looking at the individual transit or street related funds that uses the TDA monies or STAF monies that they've claimed. So in most cases, it's simply 1 or 2 funds of the city or the county that we are looking at. Each of those reports, though, does generate a financial statement, a fiscal part, as well as compliance testing that we do to make sure that the money has been spent in accordance with the purposes for which it was claimed and in accordance with the TDA code. Each of those city reports and the county reports then follows a similar pattern, and I believe you've received copies of all of the completed reports, the counties and the cities and the RTPA. But those claimant reports will consist of an auditor's report, a set of financial statements, and then information addressing the compliance aspects for each of those claimants. If there are any compliance findings that drive out of those particular audits, they will be noted in each of the individual cities' report and summarized as well as part of our management letter, which is a document that I'm going to review with the board here today. For HCOG, for the RTPA, again, for the Regional Transportation Planning Agency, it gets the full-blown audit, a full audit of all of their funds and accounts, the operating activities, as I mentioned, which cover the funds from the various sources that HCOG is eligible for, the rural planning funds, the PPM funds, and any particular Caltrans grants or other funding that may be available. Those are combined and kind of cover the activities for which HCOG has control over. Those are the ones that you're able to budget for and actually report on the receipt and expenditure of those funds. It also, as part of the RTPA, we also include the SAFE activities, the Surface and Freeway Emergency Fund. It's its own separate column in the report, but again, it's all part of the RTPA's overall duties and responsibilities. HCOG, as you may remember, took over their own accounting about 2 or 3 years ago now, independent of the county, who for years had acted as the bookkeeper for HCOG. Some of the funds still are maintained by the county, the fiduciary trust funds, but for the most part, HCOG is now doing all of their accounting in-house. For the financial statements for HCOG, again, they follow the requirements for any governmental entity, which means that they actually include two different.
Could you avoid noise or something for now?
Two different sets of financial statements as part of their overall report. And again, this is pretty typical for the cities and county, and some of you are, I'm sure, used to seeing those in your own respective cities. There's what's known as a government-wide set of financial statements, which is prepared on the full accrual basis of accounting, which includes all of the liabilities that are related to the authority, even though some of those are not necessarily booked on their books, but they are required to be included in the government-wide. We make a set of journal entries to get those amounts into the government-wide set of financial statements. That set of statements includes those big liability amounts that, again, you're all aware of, the GASB 68 pension plan liability. And this year, a new liability was required to be included in the the government-wide set of financial statements. And that is for HCOG's OPEB liability, another acronym for us, the other post-employment benefits liability, which is the future liability for paying health insurance benefits for retirees of HCOG. That's a policy that HCOG has, and as such, they are required to have a calculation made of what that expected future liability is at any point in time based on current staffing levels, retirement levels, and so on. So that was added to the financial statements this year for the first time. That liability was $227,000. It would have, at June 30th, 2018, a year earlier, that same number would have been $200,000. So it did show a small increase from 2018 to 2019. Your GASB pension liability, interestingly enough, actually went down from the year before. That future liability went from $338,000 to $300,000. Part of that reason is because of some changes that CalPERS made in how they how that future liability amount is calculated. And part of it is because HCOG actually made some actual payments against that liability. After the two-page full accrual or government-wide set of statements, we have our more traditional governmental set of financial statements, and those tend to be the financial statements that are the operational statements of the entity. It's prepared on the traditional governmental accounting rules, not a full accrual method, and it's mainly dealing with money that is available to be spent, the money that comes in and is available to be spent during the year. That's the governmental method. So we prepare essentially a balance sheet and an income statement for HCOG for that in that capacity as well. I wanted to note just a couple things. The operational statement for HCOG, which again is the safe fund and its admin fund, so to speak. That statement shows, if you look at it, it's going to show an operating loss of about $168,000 because it's done on that current year basis. But when we look at it on the budget statement, it will show that there was actually a carryover. There were carryover funds that were available to be spent, which aren't reflected in the traditional governmental income statement. But there were over $200,000 of carryover funds available, so that the true, there actually still remained a surplus at the end of the year. There was about a $68,000 surplus of funds available after the June 30, 2019 year. We also have a couple statements that do reflect the fiduciary fund activity. Again, I mentioned that, how we handle the TDA, STAF funds, and so on. And those statements show the monies coming in from the state and then being dispersed to the various cities and claimants. The report also is required to include a section known as the MD&A section, which is in the front, near the front of the report. And that's what's known as the management's discussion and analysis. It's about 8 pages, kind of a summary prepared by management of HCOG that summarizes the financial results for the year and provides a little bit of a context for some of the numbers. So that's available and in theory is intended to be an easier to read analysis of what's included in that set of financial statements. And as well, the financial statements include page after page after page of required footnotes that again are required for any governmental entity, which includes information on their retirement plan, the OPEB plan, and so on. In addition to the financial report, the audited statement, each year we also prepare a management letter. And again, as I mentioned earlier, that includes any compliance findings that may have been noted both in prior years as well as in the current year. And we generally, when able, or will provide an update on the status of any prior findings, as well as identifying any current year findings. So going through those real quick, you know, I will say HCOG has done a very good job of taking care of a lot of the prior year findings that we have had or that have been in prior year management letters. So again, I think there's some recognition there. A couple of the traditional findings that you have for these transit-related entities are the eligibility for funds check that we do every year, and the Farebox ratio. Those are the two primary areas of compliance for the transit operators that we look at. So in past years, when an entity claimed more funds than it was eligible to receive, there's a finding that indicates they got a little too much and they have some alternatives in how to address that overage. As I've explained before, these are generally timing related matters because the entities are putting in their requests for funds, in many cases a year, year and a half ahead of the actual year involved. And sometimes they end up getting money from other sources. And so it creates an excess fund amount. But It really simply means they have the money sitting in their accounts already, and it means they just need to claim less in a following year. So the findings that we had in prior years, most of those have been addressed by the claimants on a subsequent claim. There's a couple, there's one for the city of Arcata that since we haven't been able to complete that audit, I'm not sure about that status. But for the most part, there's a routine process that HCOG works with the claimants to ensure that these findings are addressed on a subsequent year's claim. Another prior year finding for the administrative side of things was for the SAFE plan. It had been recommended that that SAFE plan, implementation plan be updated, and Marcella tells me that an RFP for significant changes or improvements, enhancements to the callbox program will be forthcoming very, very soon. Also, in a prior year comment, two of the entities, City of Eureka and City of Trinidad, had not filed transit claims. And again, our recommendation was just that those monies needed to be applied for. They remained allocated to those cities, but the paperwork had not been submitted. But during the 19 years, City of Trinidad and City of Eureka both did file the appropriate claims and get caught up on their TDA monies. Another prior year funding that related to the City of Arcata, again, it's something we've been tracking in terms of their Greyhound bus program operating at a deficit. Again, having not been able to complete that audit, I'm not sure about the status of that one, but we will be looking at that and providing an update to that finding as soon as we are able. And let's see, and a farebox ratio finding, that was another one for the City of Eureka, where the transit operators all have a minimum required farebox ratio that they're required to attain. And to the extent that that is not met, there's a three-year cycle of non-compliance that an entity goes through. And the City of Eureka, for one of their past years, for 2 years in a row, did not meet their farebox ratio. The first year was a grace year, and the second year became a non-compliance year. And there was a shortfall amount of just under $10,000, $9,700, and that amount is required to be reduced from a future year's TDA allocation. I don't know that it has happened yet, and part of that, I think, is because of the transition of the City of Eureka to part of the Humboldt Transit Authority, who is now the responsible entity for filing TDA claims on their behalf. So we simply need to follow through with HTA to ensure that they understand that they are the entity that will need to address the resolution of that prior finding.
I forgot, you're going to have a planning commission tonight.
And then for the current year, just a couple current year findings. One of them was, again, fund eligibility for the City of Fortuna. Their senior bus program, again, claimed a little bit more in funding than they were eligible to get based on their operating expenses, less their fares of $16,000. And again, that will be most likely corrected when their next TDA claim is filed. And the last finding had to do with the City of Arcata. We just were not able to get their audit completed even as of this point. We've not been able to get the information needed. So until that happens, they essentially are not able to have any TDA funding allocated to them until the audit is able to be completed and submitted. So we obviously recommend that we move forward on getting the information to us so we can get that completed. I know their city audit was delayed and just recently completed as well. So hopeful that we'll be able to get this done before too much longer. So that's what I have initially. If I am happy to answer any questions that any of you might have in regards to either your city's audit or any of the other audits in general.
Thank you very, very much, as always. And does anybody have any questions for Mr. Borges? Is there any member of the public who'd like to speak on this item or has any questions about this?
There is no public comment.
Thank you, Christy. Okay, well, thank you again, Keith. Again, really appreciate all of your work and
You're welcome.
making us feel like we're doing the right thing. You know, these are big responsibilities. So thank you. So that will take us on then to a presentation on fiscal years 2016-17 through 2018-19 on the TDA Triennial Performance Audits. Oh, go ahead, Mayor Jones. You need to be unmuted. Need to be.
I'm sorry. Is that good now?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, should we make a motion to accept the audit?
Yeah, you can do that. That's a good idea. We
Well, I move that we accept.
you know,
Yes.
no, go ahead, please do.
I move that we receive and file the fiscal year 18 to 19 Transportation Development Act fiscal and compliance audit.
I'll second that.
Thank
I have a
you.
suggestion. I have a suggestion. It was also 2016, 2017.
That's
Oh.
good.
So,
Oh,
so I suggest you
not-
amend your motion to include the 16, 17.
I'm sorry, Councilmember Winker, that's actually not true.
Oh, I'm sorry.
In this particular presentation, it's just 2018, 2019.
Oh, so that differs
Yeah,
from
the next,
from the
from
agenda.
the triennial. Yes.
Oh, I see. Okay, sorry about that.
No,
my motion
Mayor
stands that
Jones. Did we have a second on that?
Yes. I second.
Thank you. Got confused. Thank you, Councilmember Johnson. So Christy, let's go ahead with a roll call on this item as well, please.
Okay. Mayor Winkler,
Yes.
Mayor Jones,
yes.
Mayor Seaman,
Yes.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
thank you. Councilmember Johnson,
Yes.
Councilmember Strand,
Yes.
Councilmember West,
Yes.
Supervisor Fennell,
Yes.
Councilmember Patino,
Yes.
Mr. Tucker,
Yes.
Thank you again. Really appreciate that. That passes unanimously. And now, just for a little bit of housekeeping, I believe that the presentation from Jeff didn't really have a great requirement to be a motion, but yeah, definitely thank you, Mayor Jones. It's important for these fiscal presentations to be recorded duly. So let's go on to the next one, and then this is 2016-17 through 2018-19 TDA Triennial Performance Audits, and Genevieve Evans is going to give us that report.
Hello, everybody. I am Genevieve Evans with LSC Transportation Consultants. Can everybody hear me?
You could
Yes,
be louder
very
for
well,
me.
thank you.
A little bit louder. Okay, I'll try.
Mhm.
I'm going to attempt to share my screen. I have a little PowerPoint here, so give me a second.
Okay.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So I'm going to talk about the triennial performance audits of HCOG and all the transit operators. And yes, this is a 3-year period. So we're looking at fiscal year 16-17 through fiscal year 18-19. And as you know, the Transportation Development Act is the primary funding source for public California, and it comes from our state sales tax. And there's a few audit requirements, one of which is the fiscal audit, which Mr. Borges just spoke about, and another one is the triennial performance audit conducted every 3 years. And the performance audit, or the TPA, is more broad in nature. And it's really just a way of evaluating the effectiveness and efficiency of both the Regional Transportation Planning Agency who allocates TDA funds, as well as the transit operators who receive the funds. And we end up coming up with recommendations to try and see if there's ways we can improve the organizations that are reasonable. We follow a guidebook that's been developed by Caltrans, and there's kind of a series of elements that we go through that are listed on this slide, beginning with review of certain TDA statutes. And this is just to check the box, yes or no. We also look at the performance audit in the last round, see if those recommendations have been implemented, and if they haven't, if they're still relevant. For the transit operators, we do a more detailed quantitative analysis. There's a whole series of tables and charts. If you have had a chance to look at the reports, I believe they're posted on the HCOG website, where we show for not only this audit period, but the prior audit period. So you can look at historical trends for 6 years of ridership and operating costs, fare revenues, and the performance indicators that we look at, which are things like operating costs per trip, operating costs per hour, passengers per hour. And so that kind of gives you, and that's by type of service for each operator. So there's a lot of information there. One of the steps is on-site interviews. We traveled to the Humboldt County region back in January now, and we spoke with staff representatives from all the transit operators and HCOG, and just to kind of get a better idea of their day-to-day activities, their processes, such as how is fare revenue collected, and is this a good process, and can improvements be made? And now we're up to pretty much final reports, with the exception of Arcata, because as Mr. Borges mentioned, they have been able to obtain financial data so that fiscal audits have not been completed. And we need the fiscal audit to complete the performance audit. So we're going to hold off on having a final audit for that one. So what I have here is I've just put up summarized the findings and recommendations for HCOG and each transit operator that we can go through quickly. For HCOG, you were found to be in compliance with all that checklist of that compliance checklist, with the exception of the late submittal of the HTA and Arcata fiscal audits, which Mr. Borges did mention. I believe this doesn't normally happen, and most of this is due to, for HTA, it's the county auditor. They are the one who does the accounting for HTA, so they have to provide the information to Keith and his team. And obviously county auditors have a lot of things going on, and there's been some delays there, and the city of Arcata is in a similar situation there. All recommendations from the prior audit were implemented or in progress, so that's good news. We feel that HCOG is performing effectively. We didn't see any significant inefficiencies in the normal duties that have to be done. The Embankment transit needs process is conducted in accordance with TDA laws. And HCOG has a good balance with providing enough oversight of transit operators so that, that there is some direction, but not overstepping bounds and letting the transit operator do what they do best. And there's a good relationship between the transit operator and the RTPA. Although, and this happens in rural areas, it does seem, particularly at this time, that HCOG is a bit short-staffed. I know you lost an associate planner not too long ago, so that makes more jobs for everybody else. So our recommendations are, my understanding is that you as a board don't receive an annual report from all of the transit operators on their different, costs and ridership information. I know the Service Coordination Committee does, and I know Marcella does, which is great. But it seems that as you are making decisions on funding, it would be worthwhile just on an annual basis to have some sort of report of all the transit operations so you can get a good idea over time of trends and have a good understanding to make good decisions going forward. So that's one recommendation. Farebox ratio calculations, that's what Keith was talking about. This is the big requirement that you're all likely familiar with for TDA. Rural transit operators need to maintain a 10% farebox ratio. And there's actually been some changes in TDA. It used to be if you had a higher farebox ratio back in 1978 or something like that, you had to maintain that farebox ratio. But that's changed. So all the operators in Humboldt County only have to maintain this 10%. And now that HTA has Eureka Transit and the Redwood Transit System and Southern Humboldt are really routes within the HTA system, it's our feeling that only for TDA compliance purposes, only one farebox ratio needs to be calculated in the fiscal audit for TDA compliance audit purposes for HTA. That would include Redwood Transit, Humboldt, Eureka, Dial-A-Ride, Willow Creek. Arcata is a separate system, so they still need a separate farebox ratio. Fortuna is a separate system, so they still have a separate farebox ratio. But it's our recommendation that you could take, combine all those into one farebox ratio for TDA compliance purposes. However, it's a great idea to look at farebox ratio on a per route basis as a means of evaluating that route. So that should still be done. The TDA manual, HCOG has a great TDA manual that provides a lot of information on your responsibilities and the processes. And I believe Marcella there were some changes made since there's been changes in TDA law. It was in draft form and we were kind of waiting to see what would come out of this report to make final changes. And so we do have in here some minor changes to the TDA manual for the final version. We hope that we encourage HCOG to continue with the recruitment process for a new associate planner, as we see that it does seem there is a bit of a short staff there. Of course, with times are changing now, you never know what can happen. And lastly, conduct annual performance evaluations of HCOG staff members. That's always a good idea.
Did you have a question, Councilmember Patino?
No, I didn't. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, I saw your hand. I'm sorry, Genevieve.
No worries. Did anybody have any questions on HCOG findings or recommendations? And I'll go on to the next one.
No.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Genevieve. Sorry for the interruption there.
Oh, no worries. Please do. Okay, moving on to HTA. And I did do this presentation to the HTA board as well. So I know Paul Palpatino had already heard this. Apologize for that. Our findings for HTA, if you look at the past 6 years, ridership has gone up a little bit, which is great, although it has decreased in the last 3 years, which is our audit period. But as you're probably all aware, this is a national problem. Ridership on public transit has decreased because there's been a bit of an auto loan boom. Just not as many people are transit dependent, and going forward, who knows what's going to happen with that. But productivity on HTA's fixed route is good. It's above the industry standard of 10 passengers an hour. And operating cost per trip for fixed route services is also within the ballpark for a rural transit system, about $6 to $8 a trip. We found that HTA taking over the management of all the Dial-A-Ride services as a CTA has improved the efficiency and cost effectiveness of Dial-A-Ride. And all recommendations from the last time around were implemented or in progress, so that's good. And for HTA processes, HTA has a good data and revenue collection process in place. As far as those compliance requirements, this will keep popping up. Fiscal and compliance audit was not completed on time. There's also another report that goes to the state controller. This has more operating data in it. This was also not completed on time. One of the check marks that we have to do is, did operating costs increase above 15% in 1 year? And in 1 year, in 17-18, increased 16%. So barely over that threshold. And there are reasons for this. As Keith had mentioned, with CalPERS and the OPEB costs, there's more that has to be recognized by the operators in terms of those liabilities. That increases pretty much everybody's transit operators costs that way. There are also some insurance costs, and then HTA's scope of operations expanded a little bit. But Farebox ratio for HTA did exceed the 10% minimum. And in the past few years, HTA has expanded their operations and maintenance facility, which is good. So it meets the scope of the program and is ready to take on a larger program. And in the future, we're going to have to have more zero emission vehicles, and that will take some space. HTA, we feel like on a regional level that public transit and transportation is a little bit short staffed. So another recommendation that we'll have, you'll see on the next page, is HTA could benefit by having a dedicated planner. And because HTA and HCOG work together, that planner could help each other out, but that planner could help with obtaining grants, which are becoming more important to find funding in the future. But overall, HTA is an effective regional public transit operator, is our finding. And our recommendations, report operating data and performance measures to the state controller in accordance with definitions per TDA. So TDA has some very specific definitions of how they define vehicle service hours, vehicle service miles, full-time equivalent employees. Sometimes it's kind of minor. So there's some adjustments that need to be made. Recommendation 2 is what I had mentioned is 1 Farebox ratio calculation for all of HTA services in the fiscal and compliance audit. So that's the same recommendation as HCOG. And similar to HCOG, annually provide a performance report to the HTA board, which sums all the routes and services so that we can start to get an idea of HTA as a whole and not just at the route level. But again, you should look at both the route level and the whole. And lastly, to address this issue of fiscal and compliance audits being late, and it sounds like HCOG did this a few years ago, is prepare an RFP to look for a separate, perhaps private accounting firm that could do the books for HTA. And that way we think one of these compliance audits could be done perhaps quicker or on time. Heard from other entities that they save money because there's a lot of staff time kind of following up with the county auditor. So that's our last recommendation there. Does anybody have any questions on HTA? Okay.
Don't see any questions there, Genevieve.
All right, Eureka. So this is the last time Eureka Transit's going to have its own separate performance audit. It's a little odd because switch occurred in the middle here. So technically we're doing a separate audit. But if you've read it, we don't have any recommendations for Eureka there because it's now really part of HTA and we're looking forward. We're not really looking backwards. But we do have a few findings. One of which is we think the management of Eureka Transit service has improved since HTA did take over the service. And ridership has declined a little bit, as stated, that's kind of normal, but it's still a pretty productive fixed route transit system carrying about 14 one-way passenger trips per hour. Operating costs increased a little bit during the audit period, but again, similar to, there's some transit agencies that have been seeing 20+% operating cost increases. And lastly, ETS and combined HTA have implemented all the prior audit recommendations. Oh, a few more here. And Eureka Transit System through HTA, again, has that good data collection and process in place. In terms of the compliance requirements, it's the same as HTA, just a little fixing on how you define vehicle service and hours and miles, how that's reported to the state controller. And farebox ratio was way above the 10%, but now we're saying that Eureka Transit can be lumped in with HTA in terms of that. But we are showing it, 20 to 26% farebox ratio for Eureka Transit system. Any questions on Eureka? Okay, last one.
No questions.
All right, great. Fortuna Transit, as you know, is a very small transit system. It's just a dial-a-ride system for seniors, about 3 vans, I believe. And overall, Fortuna Transit operates fairly well. Given what the program they have, they seem to meet the needs. Ridership has increased during the audit period by 6% for the last 3 years and 13% if you go back 6 years. Fortuna Transit did implement all the prior audit recommendations. There are a couple compliance requirements where we had to check no on, one of which was operating costs increased, I think, 17% in fiscal year 2018-19. Some of that is due to the fact that the Parks and Rec position wasn't filled for half of the prior year. So when that person was hired, obviously the operating costs are going to go up since nobody was being paid before. And they also have recently implemented expanded trips to Eureka. And full-time equivalent employee definition is another weird one. TDA has kind of its own definition for it. It just the same, it didn't mix with how Fortuna Transit was reporting it, but that's a minor thing that can be fixed. Fortuna Transit met the farebox ratio requirement for a rural transit operator. So that's good news again. And it's a pretty productive demand response service, carrying about 3 one-way passenger trips per hour. For a dial-a-ride system, if you're getting 2 to 2.5, that's pretty good. So they seem to, Fortuna is a relatively compact area and it seems to be working well. So our recommendations are to report these full-time equivalent employee numbers correctly to the state controller. We're kind of getting a little close to that 10% farebox ratio, although we still are above it. Fortuna did pass a Measure E sales tax measure, and some of that funding goes to funding the trips to Eureka, and that could be used as what's called local support. When you calculate farebox ratio, it's not considered fare revenue, but when you're calculating farebox ratio, you can add in some local support, which is anything generated, by locally, so it's not state or federal tax measures, and you can add that in and boost up your farebox ratio. So going forward, it's just something for them to think about if they run into trouble there. And lastly, if funding is available, research and perhaps look into dispatch software to improve the reservation and trip assignment process. Right now, Fortuna has, it's just a paper manifest. There's highlighting in terms of, what bus needs to go pick up who, and it seems to work. It's very small. It's not worth spending a lot of money on because Fortuna Transit has a pretty good operating cost per hour performance indicator. But it would be something to look at going forward that could improve reporting and overall scheduling for dial-a-ride. All right, that's it for me. Any questions on Fortuna?
Thank you so much, Genevieve. Everybody is very quiet here, but I've been keeping an eye on them and they're definitely paying attention. So that's good. Any questions from the public for Genevieve? Thank you again. Really, really appreciate it. Very, very comprehensive and comprehensible presentation. So I'll entertain a motion, and Mayor Jones has her hand up.
I just have one question. Genevieve, I'm not sure how many areas you've covered with your audits, but have you been in any areas where they're not charging at all for bus services? Just very briefly, can you describe to me if you've had any experience with that at all?
Yeah, there's certainly some routes or times of the year where, yes, there's been free fare, often paid for by LC top funds. And actually in our area, that is changing. We haven't conducted a performance audit of them yet, but I am in Placer County area, and we have gone to all fare free. And it's paid for actually in my area through the airport district. So when that audit does happen, it's becoming more common, I guess, but personally, I haven't done it where the complete system is fare free.
Okay, thank you very much, because that is something that I'm kind of interested in. So when we get some data maybe from you, we can find out how that works in other areas.
And are you looking for how that affects ridership or?
Well, ways to fund it, how it affects budgets.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, if it improves ridership, yeah, that would be another reason.
Yeah, so far in our area, again, it's had a pretty significant improvement on ridership, but I could probably get you some more details offline if you were interested.
Okay, I might contact you. Did you say you're from Placerville?
No, I live in Placer County. I'm in Tahoe City.
So when you're talking about your area, you're talking about Placer County?
Mm-hmm.
They've gone to all free ridership?
On the Lake Tahoe side, we have. So TART, Tahoe Area Regional Transit, is free now.
Okay, I won't waste any more HCOG time, but it is something that I'm interested in. So I may contact you about that.
Okay.
Thank you again, Genevieve. Anybody like to make a motion on this item?
I recommend the HCOG board receive and file the triennial performance audits for fiscal years 2016-17 through 2018-19.
I'll second
that. Mayor Seaman will second that. Thank you very much. So we'll go to a roll call again, Christy.
Mayor Winkler,
Yes.
Mayor Jones,
Yes.
Mayor Seaman,
Yes.
Councilmember Smith, Councilmember Smith,
Oh, he turned his mic off. Turn the mic on. There you go.
Yeah. Okay.
thank you.
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson,
Yes.
Councilmember Strand,
Yes.
Councilmember West,
Yes.
Supervisor Fennell,
Yes.
Councilmember Patino,
Yes.
Mr. Tucker,
Yes.
voted unanimous.
Thank you very much. Again, thank you, Genevieve, very, very much indeed. And that will bring us to our consent calendar. We will be removing item C6 from the consent calendar for some discussion. We did receive a letter from Wendy Ring on 6C. So I'll entertain a motion on the consent calendar. Is anybody else want to close something from the consent calendar? No?
I would like to close 6A. Sorry.
6A?
Yes, please.
Okay, so so we have 6A and 6C pulled for discussion. Anyone interested in discussing B, or will we move that forward as a consent calendar? Okay, I'll entertain a motion on item number 6B.
I move that we accept the consent calendar. We approve the consent calendar minus 6A and 6C.
Second.
And Mayor Seaman seconded. Okay, we'll go to a roll call again, please.
Mayor Winkler,
Aye.
Mayor Jones,
Yes.
Mayor Seaman,
Yes.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson,
Yes.
Councilmember Strang,
Yes.
Councilmember West,
Yes.
Supervisor Fennel,
Yes.
Councilmember Patino,
Yes.
Mr. Tucker.
Yes.
Thank you, voted unanimous.
Thank you very much, Christy. So that would bring us to items removed from the consent calendar, and we'll start with item 6A, the Regional Surface Transportation Allocation.
Yeah, so I haven't been on this committee that long, and I just would like to know for an FAU, how is it that these cities got on an FAU and that they continue, even though the second paragraph on page 1 states that federally it was supposed to change. So could you just explain that to me?
I sure can. So the FAU was a requirement for formula distribution in the early 90s. The RSPP funding now, we're not required to look at FAU. The reason why it's still in our policies is because we have not changed our formula in almost 20 years. So in the early 90s, there were these designations that were made, and I believe it was based on a certain level of populations. Our highest populated areas are listed: McKinleyville, Arcata, Eureka, and Fortuna. But that being said, that does not have to be part of this formula. It is just something that we've discussed at the TAC previous years, that we can go a different route, and on the staff level, everyone seems to like the way that this methodology works. But the HCOG board are the ones that decide this. So if you want to give staff direction to go back to the technical advisory committee to reconsider the way we split up these funds, we could certainly do that. I hope that sort of answers your question. It's a historical designation that we don't have to pay attention to. Basically.
I see.
Yeah.
So essentially the smaller cities then are getting less money. Is that what I'm drawing from?
That has been historical. Some agencies, so for example, Del Norte, they do a call for projects for these funds. And all the jurisdictions submit applications, and then their board decides the best use of those funds. So we're certainly not tied to the formula. It was just a matter of, it's not broken, don't fix it. But if this board says it's broken, then we need to go back to the drawing board.
Well,
so
to me, it seems unreasonable
members,
that the smaller cities, we should all be getting equal fare based on our populations, but that's just me.
There'd be simple math.
Yeah.
So that being the case, is there anybody else who'd like to discuss that, or is that something that everybody else feels should have a discussion? And if that were the case, I would recommend that we continue this particular item to the next meeting so we can discuss it more thoroughly. And in that regard, Marcella, would that be problematic?
It certainly would not be problematic. We don't have much on our agenda for the month of July. So this would be it for the Technical Advisory Committee. And I will just say that these funds have already been, they're a separate account at the County Auditor's Office. Any kind of delay will just mean that agencies get their money a little bit later. But agencies are required to submit a claim to HCOG once the board approves the allocations. And kind of just like with the audit finding was, a lot of agencies don't get on those claims real quick. And sometimes it's 6 months or 8 months before they ask for the funds that have been sitting. So I don't think that there is a time, there's no time constraint, that's for sure. Staff would appreciate a little more direction if we're looking at the smaller agencies, a certain dollar amount, or just, take away the FAU and do it all by population. I will say that the state does that a lot by population, and the smaller agencies don't do well. We often, like with the STIP, the State Transportation Improvement Program, that formula takes into account both population and road miles. And in terms of what we get compared to the more urban areas in the state, we do a little bit better because we have so many road miles.
So I'm not showing my video right now because I'm moving from one room to another. I'm talking under me. So can everybody still hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. So I have to move because the Planning Commission is coming into through. So hopefully I'll stay connected, but otherwise I'll get back on with you guys. But is there further discussion of 6A at this point, and what is the will of the board?
I would like to move forward with this because I know cities need their funds right now, and I think any delay is a mistake at this point. I mean, we're in this pandemic, the cities are having trouble enough with their funding. So I would like to make a motion that we recommend that the HCOG board approve the fiscal year 2019-2020 RSTP policy and allocation.
I'll second that.
Great. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Public comment?
Public comment on this item?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, this is Supervisor Steve Madrone. Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon,
Virtually.
Supervisor.
So I just wanted to throw in 2 cents as well to the idea of allocating these funds by population. I think the point was made about how the small cities, small districts get less through this process, but it's also true that McKinleyville, even though it's to many's knowledge the second largest or third largest, depends on where the students are in Arcata, city or non-city in Humboldt County, and it's only getting 15%, whereas Eureka is 46, Arcata 23, 24. So I would like to encourage you to consider having a discussion about those allocations and considering a change. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Madrone. Is there any other public comment on this item?
There's no other public comment.
Okay, let me bring it back to the board. I think that from my perspective, if this is something that it's something that should be looked at, okay? So can we agendize it and go through it in a thorough fashion? Marcella has requested some direction in terms of, you know, putting an agenda item together so that we can have a discussion that is informed. So I would actually ask Councilmember Strawn, what are the elements of the discussion that you would like some kind of input from staff on in terms of preparing an agenda item?
Well, I would like to, I understand what the other councilman wants to move forward because of COVID and the monies. I understand that. And maybe we could just pass this, but still put it on an agenda later to look at for next year, possibly, so that we could look at this just for fairness. And you know, I don't know the whole process or how all of these things work. I would love to hear from Marcella if population is the best way to go, or like she talked about roads, or you know, I don't know. I just was reading this and going, wait, this doesn't look right to me. So if we could agendize it later.
Thank you, Councilmember Strawn. Mayor Seaman.
So I would be okay talking about it later, but I would like to remind people that we may have our population triples every day for people who drive into Eureka. So so it's not just our population that's using our roads, it's everybody's using our roads in Eureka. So I just wanted to make that comment, and that's probably what I will say as we talk about it later as well.
So I think that, you know, it occurred to me, especially since we'll see with the vote, but you know, my guess is that a way to address Councilmember Strawn's concerns and move forward would be to honor her request for a presentation from Marcella on the foundation of why we're addressing it this way now, and what changes might be. So can we do that then? Can we think along the lines of agendizing that for the next meeting, if that's or I mean, I think we have time now for the next year's allocations, but for the next meeting or a meeting after that to discuss. Marcella, is that something that you could provide input on?
Yeah, absolutely. I already have ideas. So we could do
Great,
yeah, we
perfect.
could do straight population. We can look at road miles versus population. I can see what other rural agencies do in terms of their policies for RSTP. And then I would suggest this going through the technical advisory committee. So I would also recommend that every board member talks to their representative. If you're not sure who that person is, then Christy can help you, because it's good if it comes down from you. I will say that when years past, I did try to make a change on this just because the formula was so crazy. You should have seen it 10 years ago. It didn't make any sense. But there was a big push to, no, this is fine. Everything's good with it. So it's good to hear that we're taking a new look at it. And what I can bring back to the board in future months are just different scenarios for discussion. But I would go through the TAC first if that's fine with everyone.
That'd be fantastic. So if you take it to the TAC, we're probably looking at least 2 meetings away, right? But we'll keep
More than
our eye
likely,
on it.
yes. And I have a feeling it might be
Okay, good.
from them too.
Might be 3. It might be 3. Well, yeah. Okay, Marcella. No, that's fine. Yeah, I know they may not be ready to do it. Well, thank you so much for bringing that forward, Councilmember Strawn. And any further discussion? Councilmember Johnson.
Taking Supervisor Madrone's comments into perspective also, it would be interesting to know how the county's portion gets allocated with that large urban base there in McKinleyville, but it's, only gets 15% of the share there. So
yeah, I can tell you that when the county submits their claim, they submit their full road budget, and just they verify that these funds will go to fix one of the roads on their list, which is very large. So they give us a list of more than what they're allocated here, and with the understanding that it's going to go on the roads.
Okay, so they don't call out a specific portion for McKinleyville when they submit their claim.
No, country.
They have not in the past.
Okay.
Okey doke. Any further discussion before we take this vote? Thank you again. So we have a motion in a second, and we'll go to a roll call. Again, this is on item 6A.
Mayor Winkler,
Yes.
Mayor Jones,
Yes.
Mayor Seaman,
Yes.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson,
Yes.
Councilmember Strawn,
Yes.
Councilmember West,
Yes.
Supervisor Fennell,
Yes.
Councilmember Patino,
Yes.
Mr. Tucker,
Yes.
Thank you very much for that. And that will take us to item 6C. And this was pulled because there was a letter from Dr. Wendy, and we will enter that public comment into the record now, since it is the reason we pulled it from the agenda. Who wants to read it? I can find it, or can you read it, Marcella?
Yeah, Debbie's going to give a brief overview of the staff report. She has news about a grant that we were not successful in getting today, so we already have an amendment lined up for September. And then she will read the letter into the record, and I have asked Una Smith to speak to it. And I believe should be on this meeting.
Great, thank you. So again, just to reiterate, item 6C is the fiscal 2021 overall work program and budget.
Okay, so if the board might recall, the draft OWP was brought to you in February, and then it was forwarded to Caltrans for their review. Caltrans reviewed it, and their document and their response comments have been provided with your staff report this evening, as well as HCOG's response letter to Caltrans and the updates that have been made to the OWP. As Marcella was saying, that when I brought the OWP to you in February, I did present it with a note that work element 16, the vehicle miles traveled baseline study, was dependent on a Caltrans grant. We did receive information this afternoon that we were not selected to receive the funding for that. So the update will be reflected, and when you receive the amendment number 1 that takes place, which is probably going to be around September or October. If the board doesn't have any questions regarding the OWP and what you have received in your staff report, then I will take the time to read the public comment and then turn it over to Una for her to provide additional information on the climate change. So we did receive— Any questions? Any questions? Okay. We did receive a public comment from Wendy King, MD, and I'll read that. I would like to—
Wendy Ring.
Oh, Wendy Ring, thank you. I would like to see HCOG ramp up its climate change. We are facing a climate emergency, which requires cutting greenhouse gas emissions essentially in half over the next decade. HCOG should take a leadership role because in Humboldt County, transportation is where the climate change rubber meets the road. It's our greatest source of greenhouse gas emissions and our major climate vulnerability. Transportation between our coastal cities is at risk from sea level rise as early as 2030. Wildfire-related road closures along major routes to the east, north, and south will increasingly isolate us, while smoke advisories keep us trapped indoors, unable to walk and bike. These are not problems for individual jurisdictions to solve. Our county association of governments is the appropriate body to lead solutions. Element 14 of the draft work plan, which deals with climate change, commits only to research and attending meetings. We need climate action at a speed and magnitude commensurate to the threat. It must start now, because by the time we reach the point of pain, it will be too late. HCOG should adopt an ambitious set of regional goals and timelines for reducing vehicle mile travels and increasing alternatives to single occupant vehicle trips. Metrics could include X% reduction in VMT, X miles of protected bike lanes, infrastructure to support X numbers of electric vehicles, X% increase in transit ridership, and % implementation of a regional bike plan. There are different ways the jurisdictions could divide their responsibilities for meeting these goals, but it isn't realistic to expect them to tackle transportation emissions completely independently, given their small sizes and resources. In addition to these long-term goals, there should be commitment to some first steps in the very near future. 1, making one or more transit routes fare-free, not for a month, but for a year. Sonoma County's experiment saw big boosts in ridership, recruited a new generation of transit users, and became so popular, it spread from town to town. For that story, listen to Pool Solutions podcast at Free Lifts, https://soundcloud.com/pool-solutions/free-lifts. 2, pilots of integrated multimodal infrastructure on high volume routes, for example, a McKinleyville in-town connecting with intercity express bus connecting with bike share at bus stop in Eureka. 3, a formal program.
Excuse me, Christy, how much longer is this? I did read it, but I just don't remember. I know that we're supposed to limit it to
Not
3
very
minutes.
much longer.
Okay, let's go for it. Thank you.
A formal program for quick build changes to make streets more bike ped friendly with the role of citizen initiated projects. Cities around the country, large and small, have shown how quickly and inexpensively these changes can take place. I realize COVID has produced extreme budget shortfalls that would make one think twice about adding new programs, but local citizens now more than ever need inexpensive transportation to jobs and services, and we face a climate emergency where costs escalate with delay. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. Wendy Ring, MD, MPH. And so with that, I will turn it over to Una so that she can provide some additional information on the climate change work element.
Okay, thank you. So I'll just start out by acknowledging that we really appreciate Dr. Ring's input into this. And I absolutely appreciate and acknowledge all the valid points she makes. And they are the kinds of long-term goals definitely that are coming to the front at a statewide level and through many of the state departments, Caltrans included, and come down to us. She has ably commented on the OWP, and I want to note that it's not only through the single work element that she describes that we are doing climate change goal setting and planning. We also are open. Marcella's idea was to add this work element maybe 2 years ago, and we have never had a strong idea about what particular projects we could do to move along. So staff is ready to hear community input about that, board input about that, elected officials input about that. So the other planning projects we do, mostly the RTP, which is our major planning long range strategy, that has in it the kinds of things that we can do on the planning level and on a cooperative, coordinating, implementation level for climate change stuff. So we also do a lot of active transportation planning and promoting. So that is a portion of our climate change strategies. And are promoting transit. And some of the things that she points out to, one or more transit routes for free and quick build program. Staff's been, for example, with the free fare stuff, we've been helping HTA and the county in their discussions about that as much as we can. A thing like a quick build program, as you know, HCOG doesn't have competitive grant programs or discretionary project money like that. So those things would take more discussion and more structural changes for us to figure out how we could do stuff like that. And we would need that discussion to come from the board. And as well for adopting the kinds of goals that she recommends. The board could have those in the RTP, but it would open the discussion of what is HCOG's role in then pushing those forward, because they're at your jurisdiction's level is where you have the autonomy and the authority to choose a lot of your dollars on what is best for your jurisdictions. So that we would have to understand how you would want HCOG's role in playing, for example, trying to get to a regional VMT reduction percentage targets. And that would be the same for the other things. And for the smaller projects that you think we could do, if you direct us, for example, with the upcoming item that for the Mobility on Demand Strategic Development Plan, one of the recommendations is to increase bike share programs. So if the board decided that that was a short-term goal, then we would commit more staff time to helping that. And if you directed us to find money to help jurisdictions start, you know, we could try and implement stuff that way. That's just one way that we could address some of the good ideas Dr. Ring has.
Thank you, Una. Councilmember Winkler.
What is the relationship, if any, of HCOG to the county's climate action plan?
The one that from the planning department?
Well, what's happening is that each city, including Arcata, is submitting a portion that is going to go into the overall climate action plan for the county. And I don't know if HCOG has a direct role in that or not.
I've been part of the working group working on the transportation item, and Connor McGugan has definitely involved HCOG in that, and he's worked with me to find out what kinds of plans HCOG has that are that would help inform and help give policy examples and such. So we've been on an advisory committee role. That's been how we have contributed. And then there's also the shorter sea level rise project coming out of the Public Works Department that Hank Seaman is the project manager for. And we've also been involved as in the working group as an advisory member.
Well, thank you, Doctor, for bringing this item up. I think, as Una has pointed out, you know, as we go forward, this is something we'll keep on looking at and see how it plays into the overall strategy as we move forward to address those issues. And again, we will be hearing from Una again very shortly. But yes, of course, Councilmember West.
We have access to that letter.
It was sent out this afternoon.
I didn't get it.
Yeah.
I would like to see us move on this. I think there's a lot of good ideas. So I hope we can come back and get more information over the next year to begin taking some active role in doing something about this.
Yep. And it doesn't it to some degree relate to, no, not really, not the next item, but yes, definitely. So is there any further discussion on item 6C, the overall work program?
We do have
as it
public
stands?
comment.
We already had public comment. Oh, no, we didn't. Sorry. Please forgive me. That was on 6A. Do we have any public comment, Christy?
Yes, we do.
Okay, please speak. Welcome.
All right. Hi, everybody. This is Colin Fisk with the Coalition for Responsible Transportation Priorities. I wanted to thank Dr. Ring for her comments and highlighting this item for discussion, and also thanks to Una for summarizing the work that HCOG has already been doing. I wanted to first just encourage the board to take those steps that Una mentioned and provide some clear direction to staff to establish some of these goals, VMT reduction goals, mode shift goals, et cetera, so that they can move ahead with planning. And also to the question of, some specific shorter term projects maybe that could be undertaken under this element of the work program. One thing that comes to mind is network analysis for bicycles in particular, possibly also pedestrian or transit network analysis. I'm not sure that we've ever really done that in the county, but I think that would be a good step towards identifying how to establish networks and remove barriers that will actually encourage people to adopt those modes. So those are my comments. Thanks.
Thank you, Colin. We actually do have two other members of the public, I think. There's at least 3 hands up. So let's go to the next caller, please.
Yes, hello, Madam Chair and members of the board. This is Supervisor Madrone again. And I too want to thank HCOG and its staff for all the work that's been done in regards to multimodal transportation, trails, and working towards improving our climate conditions. We all know transportation is a big piece of that CO2 pie, and so very much a part of what goes on here with transportation planning. I have a question on work element 13. There is the McKinneyville Transit Study, and it's in red. I wasn't sure why it was in red. I know there is a number of other places in the overall document that is red. Are those edits or something new, or?
I can address that. This is the final document. The first document went out to the board in February. And so everything that you see in red in this document are updates that's in the final document. And so work element 13 is a new work element.
Oh, great. Okay, that's what I was thinking it probably was updated stuff being highlighted. Great. And so when I look at the budget at the bottom for this project, it looks like the 27,000 is not in the HCOG budget, but when I add up the numbers, there is 88,000 allocated through grants, RPA and LTF to move this work program forward. Is that correct? Or work element?
Correct.
Oh, great.
Is money that we're going to be getting from the county.
Okay, great. Well, I look forward to helping with that, as well as I know the chairperson, but that's only 2 of us, so we're okay there. The last thing I would say is that, as I spoke earlier, McKinneyville, as we all know, is now, for all practical purposes, just as large as Arcata, but the transit systems are very different. And so I think, we've been starting to have meetings and talk about how we might be able to change transit in McKinneyville to increase ridership and reduce emissions and all that good stuff. And so we've made some great headway working with HTA. Marcella has been involved in a couple of the meetings, and I look forward to working with HCOG on seeing what we can do to get this McKinneyville area a better system. So thank you for budgeting for this and having it in your work program. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Madrone. Actually got that in 20 seconds shorter than 3 minutes. Let's go to the next caller.
Yes, my name is Martha Walden. I'd just like to basically voice my support for the points that Colin and Wendy made. I read the climate change part of the transportation plan, and it's clear that HCOG is well versed about the climate change impacts of fossil fuel-based transportation. But by that same token, a well-devised regional transportation plan can reduce emissions significantly. And I know it's a challenge in a rural county like ours, and there's no silver bullet, but transportation's role seems crucial. And the next 10 years are absolutely crucial as far as the climate goes. I just don't see how Humboldt County can meet our climate goals without big changes made to fossil fuel-based transportation. Policies C1 through C4 do lay out some basic strategies that are needed to reduce vehicle miles traveled. And what I'd really hope to see now are some targets and timelines, like how many miles of added bike lanes in the next 5 years, or how much of an increase in transit ridership will be provided for, and how to attract those riders. The report we just heard from Genevieve Evans about HTA made clear that low ridership is prevalent all over the country, and it is difficult in a rural county. It's kind of a vicious cycle. The less developed public transit is, the less inclined the public is to take the bus. But the fewer people who use transit, the less incentive there is for developing it. But, you know, I count myself as one person who would be open to taking a bus if I didn't have to sink the whole day into doing a couple of errands. So I imagine that local municipalities are working along these lines. And I'm not entirely sure that I understand Una Smith's point about it precisely, the leadership role that HCOG would play. But I encourage HCOG to take as much of a lead as possible in dealing with the climate emergency. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further public comment on this item? I don't see any
further
more hands up. Great. Thank you very much. So I will bring it back to the board and see if there's any further discussion on item 6C. The overall work program. Okay, with that,
I would like to make a comment.
Pardon? Yes, of course. Go ahead.
Two things that I think a lot of the points that Dr. Ring made are valid, and I think that we should be promoting alternatives to cars. But at the same time, I think that I wonder if it's possible for us to coordinate with Redwood Coast Energy Authority in helping make it easier for people to use electric vehicles, because even though it would be good for people to shift to other modes of transportation, I expect that most people are going to continue to use cars. And so I think that working with them to promote electric vehicles would be good. The other thing that is happening now is we and a lot of other people are effectively telecommuting because of the COVID crisis. And so what I would like to see would be policies that we could promote, that when the COVID crisis hopefully is over, that we could continue to work with people to encourage them and encourage businesses for people to be allowed to work from home, because that is a way that people could significantly reduce the amount that they travel by car. So I would like to have that included in some long-term planning of HCOG.
Thank you, Councilmember Winkler. Mayor Jones.
I was going to make a motion, but if we're not ready for that, I'll withdraw.
Okay.
I would move we adopt resolution 20-14, approving the fiscal year 2020-21 overall work program and budget, and direct staff to forward this to Caltrans.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. And any further comments? With that, we'll go to a roll call. I think it's Christy who's been doing the roll call, although I see Debbie now.
Mayor Winkler,
Aye.
Mayor Jones,
Yes.
Mayor Seaman,
Aye.
Councilmember Smith, Councilmember Johnson,
Yes.
Councilmember Strand,
Yes.
Councilmember West,
Yes.
Supervisor Fennel,
Yes.
Councilmember Patino,
Yes.
Mr. Tucker.
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you, Chrissy. So I would like to echo that. I think we're going into very different times. We're already dealing with that we never knew we would have to deal with. And we're learning along the way. I think that the old paradigms may be shifting to a certain degree, and definitely telecommuting is a big part of what people are looking at now. So I know this isn't the purview of HCOG, but we have to start looking at even more robust broadband programs in Humboldt County. I just wanted to throw that in because it's on my mind. So let's go on now. Thank you everybody for the robust discussion. We'll go on to item number 8, which is Mobility on Demand Strategic Development Plan. And we have the draft final here. Welcome, Una.
Thank you. So I am pleased to bring this accumulation and culmination of the work we've been doing for the next year and a half. The lead consultant, Steve Wilkes, is here to present to you the full final. So it's building upon the technical memos you've already seen. And then at last month, I introduced to you the potential pilot projects, and he can give you more in-depth information about that and our steps going forward at the direction of the board. And then I'll just mention that in addition to this evening, we're having another public meeting, a virtual Zoom meeting Monday evening. That of course will be recorded, and then we'll leave that recording on our website. I also made a mini video in preparation for these public meetings that I tried to get it under, I tried first for 5 minutes and then I tried for under 10, but I got it on the third take, 11 minutes. And that is just to introduce to people what the 3 recommended potential pilot projects are. We're open to public comments until June 30th, or alternatively, if anyone tells me by June 30th that they're going to send me a comment, that is also perfectly fine. Then the work that I'll be doing as a follow-up is writing a report of our public participation process throughout this whole plan. And I will record any of the comments we get Monday and through June. And so with that part still pending, what I offer to the board to think of after the presentation is if you want to consider approving what you see tonight and what you've been delivered so far, contingent upon also getting the public participation report. And definitely if there are any major comments that make us write up a whole lot, I would bring it back. If we got only minor comments, then I could present that appendix at a future meeting under a consent calendar. Okay. So now I will pass it over to Steve Wilkes, who has a PowerPoint presentation, and I believe will be able to take over co-host responsibility.
Thank you, Una. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Everybody,
yes.
Okay. Let me see if I can actually share the screen.
Looks good. Yep.
Just bear with me for 1 second. How's that?
Yes, it's up.
Great.
Okay, thank you. Again, my name is Steve Wilkes with IBI Group. I've been working, well, part of the team that has been working with the project management group in preparing this MOD strategic development plan. And what I want to do is spend a couple of minutes and sort of recap what it is we did, what we heard in terms of the engagement component, identify opportunities, and then spend a few minutes just talk about the potential pilot projects and targeting for some targeted mobility strategies. Talk about measures of success or key performance indicators, examples of potential funding in terms of advancing opportunities for MOD demos or pilots, and then some of the key next steps. So just before I give this overview of all of the elements that went into developing this MOD strategic development plan, I just want to take 1 minute and just share an observation based on the public comment that I was listening to prior to this presentation, because just to echo some of the comments about the need for greenhouse gas reductions in greenhouse gas emissions and reduction of vehicle miles traveled, opportunities to cast the web a bit further in terms of access to transit and deal with or address some of the constraints around first last mile. Those are all elements factored into the evaluation piece when we were looking at alternatives. Evaluation piece in terms of having developed in concert with the project management team a number of guiding principles and the evaluation framework certainly addressed a number of these issues relating to climate change and the need to address, again, the vehicle miles traveled, greenhouse gas, etc. So back to the work plan, and we've been at this for well over a year now with the data collection, the analysis, the review of previously identified unmet transit or mobility needs, looking at innovative practices when it comes to integrated mobility on demand, developing a series, a menu of opportunities in terms of conceptual alternatives, going through a rather rigorous evaluation framework and analysis. And that's when I was alluding to the guiding principles and criteria that have been developed. And we now find ourselves, the we are here in terms of the bottom right of the slide, where we've identified opportunities around pilot projects and are now taking it back out to the public, certainly sharing with the board, and very anxious to hear any final comments in order to finalize the report, the final document. As I mentioned, what we heard, there was the administering of a community-based survey. Paper copies were available. It was available through a web link in terms of an online portal. A number of public meetings, other stakeholder consultations, heard loud and clear in terms of why people don't use transit, whether it doesn't go close enough to where they live or want to go. And that just speaks to the need to think about first last mile type solutions. Maybe it takes too long. I think there was one comment in the public comments in the previous item about the individual would be interested in using transit, but again, couldn't afford to spend a day running all of her errands. So some of the key takeaways included the need to look at how we might leverage next generation mobility operations and technology, looking at some innovative, creative solutions of next gen ops to facilitate the spontaneity of travel, convenience of travel, casting the web a bit further, as I mentioned earlier, around the connectivity to transit, current accessible fixed route services, and that just speaks to the first last mile type solutions, addressing service availability. Certainly heard desires for expanded hours of the day or days of week in terms of the availability, And it just speaks to that and areas where population or trip densities may not justify fixed route, that maybe there's some cost-effective solutions through, again, some of these MOD strategies, personal mobility, ride-hailing type services, enhanced use of, again, things like taxis, transportation network companies as part of the delivery mix. And then certainly opportunities to incorporate active transportation solutions in any type of mobility enhancements. And of course, the active transportation just speaks to the use of bicycles and you know, shared services. So in advancing, you know, I talked about some of the guiding principles and evaluation criteria with this overarching goal of providing affordable and accessible mobility solutions. And again, back to the need to reduce single occupancy vehicle trips. And that, you know, also relates to the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, VMTs, things of that nature, to change the relative attractiveness of fixed route. And as I was mentioning earlier, to address some of these first last mile connectivity issues, and to look at a range of service solutions for some of the first last mile that includes both active and motorized. So we looked at just the evolving mobility landscape, and this spoke to, and we had prepared a comprehensive technical memo on innovative practices and looked at a range of opportunities and the appropriateness or applicability in the county. And that included everything from volunteer driver programs and modern hitchhiking, on-demand transit, variations on the whole taxi TNC partnerships with sponsoring agencies like HTA, the shared use mobility, community ride sharing, and other shared use services like taxis, TNCs, to fill some of the gaps or replace services. So as I mentioned, we prepared and looked at, evaluated this range of service alternatives and mobility technologies, which was also another important element of the work plan in terms of aiding in trip discovery, trip planning, e-hailing, mobile payments, things of that nature. In collaboration with the project management team, had developed these guiding principles and evaluation criteria, and then went through, this is a summary of the process that we went through for evaluating each of the alternatives, service alternatives, mobility technologies, and they were evaluated relative to the guiding principles and criteria, not relative to one another. It's not, you know, we weren't looking at that kind of overall rating. So from discussions based on, you know, certainly what we heard from the community, developed some potential pilots in terms of opportunities to enhance the efficiencies of existing fixed route, reduce travel time, increase service frequency, do a number of things to respond to what we heard from the community, to respond in terms of what are some of the enhancements to entice people to use transit more frequently, address some of the first last mile solutions. The immediate, this slide speaks to the introduction of on-demand or personal mobility on-demand, PMOD type services to provide connectivity to the RTS route. And in so doing, we also looked at, are there opportunities to streamline that route alignment? It currently has a number of deviations in the current alignment in Fortuna, Manila, and the airport. What opportunities, what time savings might be realized if we were to replace some or all of those deviations with an alternate service that would provide the feeders. Similarly, looked at opportunities to short-turn the route in terms of the McKinleyville to Trinidad, Fortuna to Scotia, what would the net savings be and benefit to riders in terms of reducing the total runtime for that route, and provide additional mobility options for those communities in terms of feeder type services to RTS, but also the prospect of using those PMOD type services for local trips that, you know, so they would not have to require the feeder to a short-term RTS. And from a branding perspective, we're just throwing out there for consideration something like, you know, Humboldt U-Ride service that might be a directly subsidized microtransit or on-demand ride-hailing, e-hailing. It's leveraging existing technology, something like Uber, Lyft type app. There's third-party vendors that are making these apps available to transit agencies. Actually, as recently as, just as an aside, 48 hours ago, Uber has now is now marketing their app to transit agencies as just another business opportunities that that they wanted to get into. The other, a second area for potential pilot speaks to opportunities specific to Fortuna Transit and opportunities to explore how to enable the general public to use the city's elderly disabled demand response service. And that is, you know, have that evolve or explore the opportunity to you know, have it evolve to more of a hybrid type service. And there's many examples, certainly throughout California, but throughout the nation, of doing just that. It results in increasing the service productivity and efficiencies, ability to access additional funding, and again, results in providing additional mobility options for residents to travel both locally within the city, for example, and provide the connectivity, first last mile connections to other bus services like the RTS route. And then the other opportunities for pilots included the modern hitchhiking, that this is certainly worthy of further exploration. And it, you know, just speaks to an administrative model where that matches drivers and passengers through an app-based platform. One would go on and virtually request a ride and see who's traveling in that general direction, you know, that day of week or time of day. And there's some good examples emerging elsewhere in the country, but admittedly it's a relatively new phenomenon, but appears to be suitable for small urban and rural communities. And then of course, facilitating the bike share program and explore opportunities with potential vendors to reintroduce a bike share program at select locations. Where I think most of us are now familiar with, you know, Dagster recently announcing their ceasing of operations, and I guess the latest is they're ceasing operations nationwide. So another key element to be included in advancing any of these pilots is measures of success and monitoring and what we refer to as key performance indicators. And this is something else that would be considered and for the most part include standard KPIs in a transit environment. When you're looking at typical characteristics of ridership and trips per hour and costs and things of that nature. All that said, when advancing these potential pilots, it's really important to include the impact. And that speaks to the reduction in VMTs and reduction of traffic congestion, the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. And that would be part of, again, measures of success. Similarly, providing access to employment, education, medical trips, things of that nature, to enhance mobility options for the community. And then we've also provided a number of examples of potential funding at federal, state, and private entities that range from FTA announcement and US DOT monies targeted specifically for technology and ITS deployment. But when we look at the kind of solutions available for the MOD strategic plan in the county, they certainly have a large ITS element. And CTA, the Community Transportation Association of America, through their Mobility on Demand projects, is looking at sort of that marriage of ITS and operational solutions for small communities. So we included just these kind of examples for further consideration. And then finally, in terms of next steps, there's certainly the need to advance discussions of the service planning elements for the restructuring of the RTS route alignment. And what that means is, from a strategic perspective, we can talk about opportunities around short-turning and looking at alternate delivery schemes for the north and south legs of the alignment, or looking at replacing the deviated components, the 3 identified, with alternatives. But it really requires the detailed service planning where you're looking at run times and the allocation of vehicles and the net benefit at the end of the day of runtime reductions and opportunities to reallocate resources for increased frequencies, things of that nature. The second key area is that of advancing discussions with the City of Fortuna regarding the prospect of a pilot for the hybrid demand response service, looking at what impact might it have on the cities, on Fortuna Transit's administrative overhead and burden if they were to take on these additional responsibilities. Might that be offset by ability to leverage other funding sources? Those kind of things. And again, it's the next key element is keep the lines of communication open. Explore opportunities with potential vendors to reintroduce a bike share program. And this has come out, well, loud and clear in previous public consultations, and the whole need to advance active transportation solutions. And then I was just hearing it echoed in the public comment from the previous item discussed just around dealing with the climate emergency. And then finally, just upon the board's input and direction, to identify immediate next steps for possible grant applications or to advance the prospect of funding upon approval of how one wants to advance with potential pilots. And at that, I would gladly entertain any questions, comments. Una, do I turn it back to you?
Through the board chair. Any
Yes.
questions or comments?
Thank you so much for that presentation, Steve. And as you are probably aware, we did discuss that, quite a bit with Una earlier on. It's really nice to see this this study and the in-depth. I don't remember that when we talked about it before, there was the potential of the pilot program. Maybe I'm wrong there, but that sounds interesting to me. Are there any questions or comments for Mr. Wilkes?
I have one comment. This is Michael. That I think that bike share is a really good idea, but I think that because of people's valid fears of exposure to the virus, that people, I think, are very reluctant to use that now. So I think to keep that on the back burner is a good idea long term, because I think it's good. But for now, I think that I don't think would be financially viable. And one area that we could also be helpful, I don't know if you explored this, is very small electric vehicles or even electric scooters as one contribution to shared mobility.
If I may, through you, Madam Chair, to
yes,
respond.
Please.
I'm glad you raised the whole post-COVID environment, because and you know, I've added some text into the latest iteration of the report to address just that and the amount of uncertainty in going forward, because we certainly know how it's impacted on transit budgets. It appears to be the reason that bike share was removed from the county, or ceasing the ceasing of operations. And then the electric scooters and the prospect of, you know, the electric ped cabs and things of that nature. We did add some text in the latest iteration of the draft document to mention just that. And in any discussions of bike share programs, it's often the same vendors that are providing electric scooters. There's many that suggest there really isn't a sustainable business model for electric scooters, but certainly worthy of discussing.
Any other questions for Mr. Wilk?
Yes, please. Can you hear me?
Yes, is this Sue? I can't see you.
Yes, sorry. This is Sue Strand from Rio Dell. So I am brought up at the last meeting when this was brought up, these pilot projects. So I brought it to our city council Tuesday, and the whole council was very concerned, and staff. We definitely want to keep our bus route to Riedel, Scotia. Is there a reason you want to remove this? I would love to see the numbers. I know when I drive my grandson to preschool, there was always people at the bus stops. I know it's being ridden, so I'm not sure. And you want to keep, one of your goals was to reduce single operation vehicles, and yet you're wanting us to call Uber or get a taxi. It just seems like it's counterproductive to me. So I guess I just want some further explanation on that, or maybe some numbers as to why you're wanting to cut that route, please.
So if I may, through
Go
you,
ahead.
Madam Chair.
Yes,
we
please.
Did look,
yes, please.
I'm sorry. We did look at the numbers in terms of the boardings by time of day and what have you. And when we talk about, you know, the elimination of that route segment, it's replacing it with a different type of service. So it may still be, you know, scheduled microtransit. Instead of the large RTS bus, it may be, for some times of day when there's 1 or 2 passengers, it might be a 4-door sedan. It could be a Prius. Other times of day, or maybe it's a minivan of sorts. And then could still be operated with the channeling of demand, say every hour on the hour, or so that it's pulsed or timed to meet the RTS bus. So yes, admittedly, it may require a transfer as opposed to just a single seat ride. But there would be a service alternative. And that service alternative, through pricing policy and things of that nature, would be in a shared ride mode. So that ideally you would be reducing the number of you know, VMT, vehicle miles traveled, things of that nature. And then similarly, and what we've seen often with these kind of PMOD or microtransit solutions, is it provides other mobility options for within the town, within the city travel. That it, it can sort of form that dual purpose of providing the connectivity to the fixed route while providing local service for well, again, local origins destinations. But these, again, you raise some really good points, and this is precisely the kind of detail that would have to come out of that detailed service planning to look at the specifics of, you know, that first element here of the service planning elements for the restructuring.
Yeah, I've not talked to the people at the bus stops. I certainly can stop and ask them. It's a small town where we wouldn't need anything in town. Most of these riders look like, to me, they're probably going to CR. They look like students to me. They may be going to up to Humboldt, all the way up. I don't know, but and a lot of them also, I'm sure, just go to Fortuna because it's the nearest larger grocery stores or any form of shopping available to us. But I know Scotia does not have a representative on HCOG, and I know they would be concerned. It very much concerns me that you want to change this format. I don't think that it's going to benefit my community here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Strawn. Councilmember Johnson. Oops.
All right, now I'm back on. As a follow-up to that, also looking at the Trinidad, Manila, Eel River Valley, Rio del Scotia terminuses, and catching whether it's a ride share, a shuttle, whatever, does this entail then a dual fare scenario, or would you catch the shuttle to the main transit stop and then your fare that you paid for the shuttle to get there covers the rest of the ride, or how is that going to work?
The short answer is it would be a single fare, and you would pay at time of boarding, and that might then entail, you know, the free transfer to the big bus if you're using this as a feeder or providing that connectivity to the fixed route services.
Okay, that's because that would be a concern, you know, whether you're going to have a higher transit fee. So, okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Wilkes? Seeing none, I will, at this point anyway, I will go to public comment on this item. Is there any public comment? I do see a hand raised for a phone number.
Yes, there is public comment.
Yes, thank you, Christy. Go ahead, please, caller.
Hi, this is Colin Fisk again. So I did comment on this item briefly last month, as you may recall, but now that we're at a sort of final plan, I had a few more details I wanted to mention. So we do support most of the recommendations, but with a few sort of caveats and comments. Regarding the suggested RTS route modifications, we would support those provided that they do result in an increased frequency of service on the main line, which, you know, would be attractive to more riders. Also that the replacing service operates as a carpool system or a joint ride system rather than individual trips. That, as was just mentioned, that service also has the same fare and connects with free transfers. Also that connecting and replacing service is accessible to people with wheelchairs and other devices, and the connection points to the scheduled large bus transit are at weather protected bus stops. Also, regarding the bike share and other expansion of bike infrastructure, definitely supportive of that. I wanted to highlight the fact that I think there is demand for this year, that Zagster, as was mentioned, Zagster folded countrywide because of coronavirus and other impacts to their business. I don't think we have a particular problem here in Humboldt beyond what the whole nation is facing. I do think that bike share should be looked at as an extension of public transit, and I think it's likely that in order for it to be affordable and well-maintained and well-managed and as extensive as we want it to be, that it will have to be somewhat subsidized and not just facilitated. And I think that should be considered, to ensure that it provides high quality and equitable service. I also think specifically in terms of the proposed bike share stations that there needs to be more than one of them in McKinleyville, at least one additional one probably at the McKinleyville Shopping Center. And also when we look at this expansion of bike infrastructure, so I think we have to consider that just as the current availability of widespread free car parking facilitates driving, we need to look at the future availability of widespread free and high quality bike parking, which should be prioritized at transit stops, but also we need a significant expansion of it in all commercial areas and increase the requirements for future development. Finally, I wanted to note that the report identifies, that there are lots of opportunities for personal mobility on demand to fill existing gaps beyond what are identified in the recommendations for connecting people to transit as well as other destinations. But I think we can't really rely on private companies to do all of that on their own. And I would suggest that there need to be regulations and incentives for e-hailing companies to ensure that they provide accessible vehicles and serve populations with the highest needs at reasonable rates, and also that they meet our goals for vehicle miles traveled reduction and transition to electrification and all of our other important environmental goals. So I would hope that there should be, coming out of this report, we could develop a plan for that kind of regulation and for dealing with the future of other issues at the intersection of mobility on demand and smart infrastructure and autonomous vehicles and electrification, all of those things that are coming down the pike. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. Are there any further public comments on this item?
No, there are not.
Okay, so what I would like to ask is, in terms of process here, clearly there's some other thoughts going into this, both from from several of the council members and from public comment. What is the process? I know that you're going to have another meeting on the 22nd, but in terms of planning and implementation, how many more opportunities will there be for input on this plan?
So our consultant team is under contract through June 30th, and that is also when our grant funding expires. And so after that, we would still work on it just through HCOG staff time. So at the pleasure of the board, we can extend this because we don't have any statutory regulations or any of that sort. And then I would want to know from the board how much of the recommendations you want to keep in the strategic development plan as plans to go forward potentially. And on the other hand, if there are parts of it that you just want recorded as this is what the professional team found, but we don't want to pursue this, then it would be documented as so in the plan and separated from the kinds of strategies that the board does want to have staff push ahead with.
Thank you, Una. So any further discussion on this item? Any more questions, comments? Okay.
It was just,
well, go ahead, please.
well, I was just going to bring up some that we have concerns for how this could possibly affect our intracity paratransit program. I see, and it might seem to make sense that Fortuna take on the shuttle, shall we say, rideshare to the south, but we're already averaging 3 riders an hour, as you heard from the audit, and some days we're operating 2 buses, and we also do a trip to Eureka for medical appointments on Wednesdays. So we're fairly busy, and we've looked at a couple of different scenarios, and because this has the potential, the first RTS bus gets there at, I think, 8:43, but the last bus comes at 8:46 p.m. So that would need to be serviced also. And our drivers are 8 to 4:30. So there are some challenges to overcome there. And for the sake of brevity, I'll just leave it at that for now. We'll probably have opportunity to discuss more later. And following Chairwoman Estelle's what she said, I would be interested in seeing where this is going, from here, how we proceed. What's the next steps?
And if I may, so this being just the strategic development plan, if we do want to continue exploring it, it's not a promise to do anything, but I know that there's plenty of information to still gather, both from community needs, like what really are the community priorities. And that goes from everything as big to the earlier conversation about how are we really going to get people to ride more transit and not have single occupancy vehicles? How are we really going to get greenhouse gas emissions lowered? So is this a viable way? So if we still want to, explore it and put resources into getting more information about, is this going to increase transit, or is this actually going to decrease and turn people off to transit? Then this strategic development plan could be, just the stepping stone to say, yeah, we'll explore it more. But I don't want to explore it more if it already seems like this is not the right time and it won't be a good idea for a while, and that there's resistance now, then we would be happy to explore other avenues that are going to get us to our broader goals sooner.
Thank you for that. It's just, those are just some observations that just kind of showed up in a hurry. It's not the be all end all, I understand, but that's just things that showed up first that we saw.
Yeah, understood. And we didn't know when we started this, what mobility on demand is going to help us. I was thinking our plan would be like, oh, you guys should hire someone to get this app. I didn't know what would come out, and this is what came out.
Okay, thank you.
So you all have a copy of the agenda, and there is a recommended action from staff. If any members of the board would want to make that motion, or it does contemplate giving direction to staff. So is there any further discussion, direction that we can give to staff on this item?
Can I make a motion excluding the pilot programs?
You can make any motion you want.
Sue, Sue,
Yeah.
excuse me, are you talking about excluding it for Fortuna Southern Humboldt or all possibilities?
Oh, Southern, just Riedel, Scotia.
Okay. That helps. It kind of narrows it down. Thank you.
So I'd like to move that PAC recommend the HCOG board approve the draft final mobility on demand strategic development plan, excluding the southern portion Riedel, Scotia, a pilot project, and direct staff to bring back to the board any non-minor public comments received during the public review period.
Any second on that?
I'll second that.
Okay. So we have a motion and a second. Any discussion of the motion as presented?
I would just like to acknowledge that Sue did mention this last time when we had the presentation as well. So I remember this being a concern that she's carried on. So.
Yep.
I was going to say something similar as Mayor Seaman, and also that I hope that Councilperson Strong has a good feel for that. That's what her constituents want. I'm sure that you're in touch with them, and I will vote for this, but I just want to be certain that you have a handle on the fact that that's what your constituents really want for your area.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Jones. Yes, like I said, it was brought up at our council meeting. Tuesday was our meeting. The entire city council was behind it. The staff we were all opposed to them taking our bus route away, and certainly a letter will be written and sent to HCOG on behalf of that. And yeah, it's a real concern for us here. We're rural. We're 10 miles, 12 miles south of Fortuna. That's a big deal to us. So thank you.
Any further discussion? Okay, let's have the vote, Christy, please.
Mayor Winkler,
Aye.
Mayor Jones,
Yes.
Mayor Seaman,
Yes.
Councilmember Smith, Councilmember Strand,
Yes.
Councilmember West,
Yes.
Supervisor Fennell,
Yes.
Councilmember Patino,
Yes.
Mr. Tucker,
Yes.
Forget
Motion
Councilmember Johnson.
Did you call Johnson?
I'm sorry about that. Councilmember Johnson,
Yes.
A seconder of the motion.
Thank you.
It happens.
Well, thank you for quite a robust discussion and a very interesting presentation. And obviously, with that kind of a change to that, it'll be interesting to see what comes out. And again, I will reiterate that there will be another virtual meeting on this on the 22nd. Is that correct?
Yes, 5:30 to 6:30.
Okay, thank you. All right, so thank you very much. We will now reconvene as the HCOG board and by motion, reconvene as the HCOG board and approve the PAC recommendations. So I'll entertain that motion.
I so move.
I'll second.
Okay, and because we're in a virtual world here, we will do a roll call on that as well.
Mayor Winkler,
Aye.
Mayor Jones,
Yes.
Mayor Seaman,
Aye.
Councilmember Smith, Councilmember Johnson,
Yes.
Councilmember Strand,
Yes.
Councilmember West,
Yes.
Supervisor Fennel.
Yes.
The motion passes.
Thank you, Christy. So that brings us now to matters that members of the PAC and staff may wish to present, and we will go to a Caltrans report on the last chance grade.
Hi, yes, thank you. Just wanted to do a quick update on last chance grade. The work is continuing on the environmental studies and some of the exploratory drilling required for the preliminary analysis. So phase 2B is on schedule. Drilling is still expected to occur in October of this year. The next public meeting is going to occur this summer or fall. The full closure, you may have heard in the news about full closure of Highway 101 at last chance grade. That was June 15th, and it was supposed to occur also tonight, but it looks like they've opened it up early. So if you're traveling through that area, I always check Quick Map ahead of time, but it looks like the road's going to be open tonight. Thank you.
So Kevin, how has that nighttime closure worked? Did you catch anybody by surprise?
You know, I didn't hear any stories. I know they were doing their best to get folks through. They were bringing a lot of material in there to raise the grade of the roadway. There was quite a big dip, and so they're trying to fix some of the deformation.
Great, thank you. Any questions or comments for Kevin? Seeing none, that is the last item on the agenda. Thank you, Kevin. We do have one other, yes, I do have something else, but Mayor Jones.
But this is not for Kevin. These are questions for Marcella. If we're getting,
I was actually going to bring Marcella on right now.
Okay.
She wants to say something. So, Marcella.
Yes. I don't know. Councilmember Jones, did you have a question for me before I make my announcement?
Well, it may be in your staff report. I'll wait until you're done.
Well, unless you can read my mind, I'm really kind of excited to announce that I'm going to retire at the end of the calendar year. And this is not a difficult decision. I have a new husband, a new puppy, and stay in place order has really caused a spike in my quality of life. So I'm excited. I did let the two members of our executive committee know. And then one thing I did let slip was elections of new officers this year. So right now we only have 2 executive committee members. At our next meeting, we will have the elections and have our 3rd member, our vice chair. But in the meantime, my recommendation is to do some kind of a recruitment for the job. Not that we might have some good local people, but knowledge of the California Transportation Commission is really important. So that would certainly be a decision for the board to move in that direction. So I'll continue to meet with our 2 executive committee members and get direction from them, and we can discuss it at our next meeting, if that's fine with everyone. Was that your question, Ed?
No, it was not. But what's your timeline on retiring?
I'm saying the end of the calendar year, but certainly I'll work with any timeline for hiring someone.
Okay. My question, well, I had 2. First of all, what's the status on recruiting an associate planner?
Yeah, so I have been thinking about that. It's nice to have a savings for not hiring someone, but we do have a lot of work. And my idea was in lieu of my retirement, if we can get that recruitment going and then start the recruitment for the planner a few months after, so that the new hire can really make the decision on which candidate to choose. And you know, that's just my idea. I think it would be nice to have the new person be able to make that decision since they'll be working with them. But we can go another direction if the board desires.
Well, that was kind of my question before I knew you were retiring, but I can see the wisdom of that decision. And then my second one was, did we get a police report from the 101 corridor this month?
Unfortunately, we didn't at the time of the mailing, so we will have that next week, but we did receive it after we sent everything out. And I will tell you that the winner was someone going over 100 miles an hour. Yeah. So I don't have the details in front of me, but we will report on that at the next meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Wow. Well, thank you for being so conscientious as to let us know well in advance, Marcella. As I mentioned to you in my email, you leave very big shoes to fill, and we have a challenge now to find the right person for this very specific job. So I appreciate you doing that. I appreciate you offering to help us, and we'll set up a meeting of the executive committee and discussion at the board to decide how to move forward. But I think we're going to have to do a recruitment. And so all of those things take time. And so thank you for giving us some time, Marcella.
Oh yeah, I'm all very willing. I would also recommend that the technical advisory committee be involved as well, since we work so.
Yes.
And I'm sure they all have
definitely.
opinion.
They definitely need to be involved. Yes. Well, thank you, Marcella. I'm kind of strange, but you sound like you're happy, and that's good.
Yeah, I am. Even after a 3-hour meeting, I'm still happy.
Yeah, so I was getting a few texts. I thought I was going to be able to do it all from the chamber, and the next meeting came in, and then I'm getting texts from other things. I'm going, no, we're still in the meeting. But it's a very interesting and comprehensive meeting. So thank you, everybody. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.